Welcome to Lovin' Life's Journey DIY. If you are new to my channel, my name is Chantal and I love to do Dollar Tree DIYs and DIYs on a budget. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you 25 hacks for turning everyday Dollar Tree items into high-end pieces for decorating and organizing your home. I have a lot to share with you, so let's get started.
To start out with, I'm going to show you how to make a dupe of this IKEA hanging bucket. This project, I will be using one of these galvanized tin buckets from Dollar Tree. I'll also be using a toilet plunger. And I'm using a chain plant hanger from Dollar Tree, but if you can't find those, you can get chain from Home Depot for 51 cents a foot, and you probably would only need like 2 feet would be plenty. I also picked up 2 of these square rosette blocks from Home Depot. These were in the wood trim section and they're $1.58 each. From Walmart, I picked up a package of these cup hooks in the black color for $2.47. And then I also got a package of these 2 wooden knobs, and I believe these were $1.98. I'll also be using some wood glue, my hot glue gun with Gorilla Glue, and a foam paintbrush. For my paint, I'm just using some that I had on hand. I had this white Martha Stewart paint from Michaels. It's in a gloss, but you can use any white paint. I'm also using this apple barrel paint in the color black, and some clear sealer that is gloss. I wanted it in a gloss finish for this project. A couple other things I'll be using are a hammer and a large nail, and not shown is some sandpaper and then also some pliers, and I find it easy to have a couple pairs of pliers. I'm going to start by removing the rubber bottom part of the plunger and just setting that aside. We won't be using that. I'm just going to use the handle of the plunger, and I am going to need to remove this threaded part of the handle because I don't want that, and then the other end is a little bit rounded, so I'm going to want to make that so that it's flat. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use my miter box and saw set, and I will link this in the description box below. This is about $10 or $12 for the set, and it's super handy for crafting. And so I'm just going to put the handle in there and put my saw down in the guide and then just saw that threaded part off. Then I'm going to remove the sticker and use a piece of sandpaper to just go over the whole handle, and this will get rid of any adhesive that's left on the handle as well as any rough spots. Now I'm going to take my 2 wooden knobs and I'm going to glue one to each end of the wood handle, and I will be using some wood glue and also a little bit of hot glue just to help hold it in place while the wood glue dries, because this is a really awkward piece to try and clamp together in any way. So that hot glue will hold it on while it allows the wood glue to dry for a stronger bond. Next, I'm going to take those 2 wood blocks and I'm going to paint them with the black craft paint. Then I'm also going to give the handle a couple coats of the black paint as well. So here I've already put one of the hooks into the block and it just screws in really easily. I wanted to show it to you without the paint because it's a little easier to see, but I will show a little bit later when I screw the other hook into the other block. So while the blocks and rod are drying, I am going to paint my tin bucket, but first I'm going to punch the holes in the sides where the chains are going to be attached. Now I already have the holes in this one because I'm actually reusing it from a previous DIY. All I did to punch the holes was use that nail and a hammer and just gently tap it through. It doesn't take a lot of effort. Just tap it through, and then I just kind of move the nail around to make the hole a little bit bigger. And I did this on both sides of the bucket. So you can see here that I have some holes punched in the bottom of this bucket. Because I'm reusing this from a previous DIY, those holes were already there. You don't need to do that for this project. So I'm going to be using just a white paint. This is one that I had on hand. It's a high gloss paint, which you don't have to do that because we're going to spray it with a gloss sealer, but I'm going to use what I have on hand. I'm also going to rough up the tin using some sandpaper, just so the paint will stick to it a little bit better. Then I'm going to paint my bucket using my white paint, and I'm using a foam brush. You can use any kind of brush that you want. And I'm just trying to do long, smooth strokes so I don't get a lot of brush lines. And I will put about 3 coats of paint on this to get a nice bright white look. I did paint the inside of my bucket. I didn't want any of the galvanized tin to show through because if I have something in the bucket and you can see the inside a little bit, I wanted it to look like it was an enamel piece. And then I'm going to take some black paint and just get a little bit on my brush and go around the top and the bottom edges of my bucket. This will just give it a little bit of an aged look, which the IKEA bucket that I have is not aged at all. And so I just thought I would do this one a little bit different. So that's why I decided to go ahead and add the black. And you can do this as little or as much as you like. You can make it look really aged and antique, or you can leave it new and white and crisp looking, kind of more like my IKEA one. I also decided to add a few black marks just all around the bucket, just to take away a little bit of that stark white look. Since I did distress the top and bottom, I thought that would make it look a little bit more authentic. So the reason I chose these cup hooks and these blocks to hold my rod was because I needed something that held it out away from the wall enough that the bucket would hang nicely. And I liked these cup hooks because they were already black and they screw easily right into the blocks. And you do want to screw these in a little bit slowly so that you don't crack the wood. I did go a little bit too fast and I chipped a little piece of the wood out, but I just touched it up with some black paint and you can't tell at all. So now I'm going to take my clear gloss sealer and spray all of the pieces with this. I'll do a couple of coats on them all just to make sure they have a nice, good protective coat so that they won't chip or scratch. To figure out how to hang my piece, I took my bucket and I measured the distance between the holes, and mine were 10.5 inches apart, and then I added 3 inches to that, and that is where I'm going to position my hooks. And then I can just snap my rod right down inside those hooks, and it holds it really nicely. Then I'm going to take the plant hanger that I got at Dollar Tree, and this actually has 3 chains on it, but I'd already taken one off to use for a different project. So I'm using this because it has the hooks already on it, and so I'm just going to insert those hooks into those holes that I made in the bucket, and they just snap on really easily. If you're using the chain from Home Depot, you can just open up one of the links and put that through the hole and then close it back up. So then I'm going to figure out how far I want my bucket to hang down from the rod, and so I'm just kind of eyeballing this, and then I'm going to count how many links on the chain that it takes, and so I am just putting the chain around the rod, and then I will be attaching the link into one of the other links to hold it around the rod. So now I'll just loop that chain around the rod, and I'm going back behind and bringing it forward, and then I'm just going to open up one of the links enough so that I can slip the last link into it, and then I'll tighten it back up so that it is held onto the rod. And here is what it looks like when it's all assembled. It's not identical to the IKEA one, but it's really nice and it's really close, and it was a lot cheaper to make it myself than the one that I bought at IKEA several years ago. And so I'm really happy with how it turned out. And here is the original IKEA one, and I really like this. I put some Dollar Tree succulents in it in some little tin buckets, and so I decided to take some of those out and put it in the one that I just made, and I could put 2 of them in there, and it just looks really cute. I can't believe how nice this turned out for as little as it cost.
One of my favorite projects is this slim K-cup holder. It looks good and it functions well, so let me show you how to make it.
To make this K-cup holder, I will be using 4 of these little thankful signs from Dollar Tree. They are hollow and have a picture hanger in the back. And I'll also be using 1 package of the wooden rulers from Dollar Tree. Then I'm going to be using some black craft paint and a foam brush, and this is just apple barrel black paint from Walmart. Then I'll be using my hot glue gun, and I'm using Gorilla Glue sticks in this, and I would recommend using Gorilla Glue sticks or even using some E6000 if you're not going to use the Gorilla Glue. So first I'm going to take the plastic off of the signs, and then I'm going to gently pull off the picture hanger that is on the back of them. And I will just repeat this for all 4 signs. Then I will take the 2 rulers, and the colored strips that have the measurements on them are just stuck on, so they will peel right off, and there will be a little bit of sticky left on the ruler, so I just take a little bit of sandpaper and rub over the top of that, and that takes it right off. Next I'm going to take my black craft paint, and I will paint the side of the rulers that I removed the measurements from. There is a little bit of a raised part in the center of this side, and so I'm going to be painting that side and then also the edges, but for now I'm going to leave the back side unpainted. Next, I'm going to take the signs, and on the back side I'm going to just use my foam brush and take some paint. I'm going to paint the edges all the way around the sign, and then I'm going to paint the insides of the signs as well, and I will do this for all 4 signs. I did end up using a smaller paintbrush to get down inside of the corners and fill in some of the places on the ends. Another way you could do the edges is just to take a black Sharpie marker and color along those edges. If you have a nice new Sharpie marker, it works best. Now I'm going to take the flat unpainted side of the ruler and I'm going to just hold it up onto the side of the sign and mark the ends. And I'll do this on all 4 ends of the 2 rulers. Now I took a long time trying to lay this out and get it spaced just right because the 2 signs in the center I'm going to actually tilt, and so it was a little bit tricky. So I'm just going to give you the measurements of how to mark your ruler, and then you'll know where to place these. So each end of the ruler is going to be 1 1/4 inches. Then you're going to have a mark that's 4 inches and 3 1/2 inches, 2 inches, and then again 1 1/4. And I know that doesn't really make any sense, but it all comes out in the end. Just trust me. There is a method to my madness. So I don't know what happened to the video of me actually gluing these, but I glued the signs on the top and the bottom of the ruler basically, and I put my ruler so that the hole in the ruler is facing up. And then I will glue the other ruler on the other side so that I basically have a box. And you want to make sure that the open sides of your signs are facing up. So now I'm going to glue in the 2 middle signs, and this is where those measurements come in. And so at the 2-inch mark, I am going to put the bottom of another sign and put that corner of the sign right on that mark. Now I don't want to put these just flat straight across. I want to tilt them. So I'm going to keep that bottom corner of the sign on that 2-inch mark, and then I'm going to tilt the sign until the opposite top corner is right on the edge, the other edge of the ruler, just as you see here. And then I will just use some Gorilla Hot Glue to attach this to the ruler. Then I'm going to add the 4th sign. I'm going to put that bottom corner of this sign on that mark where we marked the 4 inches. And then I'll basically put this on the same way. That bottom corner is going to go on that 4-inch mark, and then I'm going to tilt the sign and line up that other top corner on the edge of the ruler, and then I'll glue it down with some Gorilla Glue as well. Then I'm going to flip it over and glue the other edges of those 2 center signs, and I'm just using my ruler to make sure I get the one at 2 inches, and then the top one will be at 4 inches. Now I just need to paint the insides of those rulers where I had my measurements on the inside. I didn't want to paint them beforehand because then I would not be able to see my measurements well, and also I wanted the glue to adhere really well, so I thought that'd be best to wait and paint it after I glued them. I did try to use the foam brush for this, but it was just too big and I ended up switching to a smaller brush. So here it is, and I love how it looks. The black and white buffalo check is real farmhouse looking, and it holds 24 K-cups perfectly, and I love it right next to the Keurig machine, how it's just so compact and right up against the wall. It's perfect. It's exactly what I wanted.
Next, I have some faux galvanized metal projects to share with you, starting with these wall decor pieces.
For this project, I am using two 8x10 picture frames from Dollar Tree. You can really use any size for this. You just need to scale your other pieces to go with it. I'm also using these aluminum cookie sheets. They come in a 2-pack at Dollar Tree. I'll be using a total of 3 cookie sheets, so you'll need 2 packages of these. I'm using one of these pineapple cups. Really, all I'm going to be using is the straw from this. And I'll be using one of these whistles from these party favors. I'll be using some floral wire that I got at Walmart. I had this on hand already, but I think you can get some wire at Dollar Tree. And I'll be using chalk paint in the colors Elephant, Truffle, and Ivory, as well as some just black craft paint that you can use any kind. Since I'm putting my project outside, I am going to seal it with this matte clear sealer. And I'll also be using E6000, some Gorilla Glue sticks in my hot glue gun, and a foam brush. The first thing I'm going to do is glue my aluminum baking sheets together to make a triple layer of aluminum. This will just make it sturdier and so that it will hold up better, especially since I'm going to be putting this outside. So I'm just putting some E6000 on one of the trays, and then I will press a second tray down on top of that. Then I'm going to take a third tray and I'm going to cut the rim off of this one, just because when I glue it onto those other two, I think it'll be a little bit hard to cut through all 3 layers, so this way that third rim will already be cut off. Then again, I'm just adding the E6000 onto the 2 trays that were glued together, and I'm going to put that third piece of aluminum right on top, and then I will just weight that down with some heavy books and I'll let that dry completely. So I actually saw this project in a catalog, and so the picture was pretty small, but I wanted to use the same butterfly and dragonfly shapes, so I enlarged them on a copy machine, and I couldn't get the whole butterfly and dragonfly on the one piece of paper, and so I'm going to be cutting this out and then tracing it on a folded piece of paper so that I can make a full size pattern. Now I realize that you won't have this same picture, but you can find any butterfly or dragonfly shape that you like and do the same thing. Just enlarge it to the size that you will need. And for this, you want the butterfly to be large enough so that it will touch the frame in at least 3 places. So as you can see with mine, on the top corner on the side and then that bottom wing, those will all connect with the picture frame. And with the dragonfly, you want to make sure that both wings will touch the frame. So then I'm just going to trace my shapes on the foil trays now that they're completely dry, and then I'll just cut those out. Then I'm repeating the exact same steps for the dragonfly wings. Next, I'm going to use the elephant chalk paint, and I'm going to just use the foam brush and just really sloppily paint this on. I'm not trying to cover all of the silver, I'm just putting a light coat on. Once the first coat is dry, I'm going to go back over it with a second coat of paint, again just kind of sloppily, and then I'm going to take a paper towel and just kind of blot it so that you don't see any brush strokes, but it just kind of has a little bit of a mottled look, and it's okay if the aluminum baking sheet is showing through in places. In fact, I wanted it to show through a little bit more, so in some places I rubbed a little bit harder with the paper towel. After that paint is dry, I'm going to come back in with some of the truffle colored chalk paint, and you can use any darker colored paint. I'm going for kind of a rusty aged look, so I wanted it to be kind of a brown color, but any darker color will kind of give it that aged look. And I'm just going to brush some around the edges in places and just in some various spots just randomly. So now I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with this pineapple cup. I'm sure you've been wondering, but really I'm just going to use the straw out of it, and then I'm going to use one of these whistles, and I'm going to take the whistle part off of it and just use the bottom part and not the whistle. Using the foam brush and that black craft paint, I'm just going to paint both of these, and I do kind of have to squish the paint into that ribbed area of the straw, but I just cover it all up, and my goal here is to make it look kind of like wrought iron. And I did do 2 coats of paint on this. While that's drying, I'm going to take apart my picture frames, and I'm going to pull out those little tabs that hold the backing on and just remove everything so that all I have left is just the frame. Then I'm going to paint my frames using the chalk paint in the color ivory, and I am giving these 2 coats, but I'm not worrying if a little bit of the black frame shows through because I am going to be distressing these a little bit. So while the frames are drying, I'm using a little bit of the elephant chalk paint just to dry brush on to these pieces to give them a little bit more of an aged look as well. Next, I'm going to take some sandpaper and just rub it in random places on the frames once the paint is dry. And I usually do all of the corners and then just a few random places. When you're distressing things, you want to do the edges that would get worn so it looks a little more natural. So generally the corners and the edges will get a little bit of sanding and then just some random places. Once I'm done sanding, I just take a damp cloth and wipe the frame down to get all of the paint dust off. To assemble the dragonfly, I'm going to first add some craft sticks to the back of the wings, and this will just give it some more stability. And I'm using E6000 and my hot glue gun to glue those on. Then I'm going to figure out where I want to place them, and I'll go ahead and glue the body onto the wings using E6000 and hot glue again. Then I'm going to position the dragonfly so that I can glue the tips of the wings to each side of the frame, and the bottom of the body will get glued in the corner. Then I'm going to cut a piece of wire about 5 or 6 inches long, and I'm going to fold it in half, and I'll be poking that folded end down inside the straw, so it needs to fit down inside the top of that straw. And then I'm just going to form the little curly tops of the antenna till I like the way they look using my pliers, and then I'll just glue that in the top of the straw for the dragonfly's antennas. So you can see here on my butterfly, there's some stripes on it. I was kind of experimenting, trying to get like a corrugated metal look, and I didn't really like it, so I went back to doing it in my original technique, but that's why you see these lines on the back of my butterfly. So I'm gluing the craft sticks on the back of the butterfly as well to help stabilize it, and then I'll be gluing it to the other frame. So before I glue the butterfly to the frame, I'm going to glue the body on, and I'm putting the open part to the top so that's like the head, so that I can insert the antenna into that just like I did on the dragonfly. I made the antenna for my butterfly the same way as I did for the dragonfly. However, I did make them a little bit longer. I just thought that was cuter, so these are probably a 7 or 8 inch piece of wire, or maybe even a little bit longer. So next I'm going to position the butterfly onto the frame, and as I said at the beginning of the video, I want to make sure it connects with the frame in at least three places. And so I will be gluing it on one side, and then the top, and then down on the other side. The final step is to spray the entire project with a clear matte sealer. And I would recommend doing this even if you're going to have it in the house, but definitely you'll want to do this if you are going to put it outside. And I put a couple of coats of this sealer on mine. So here's the set of metal flowers that I found that I wanted to recreate. These are from a website called bellafor.com, and they are $217.95 for these 5 flowers. So I am going to recreate 2 of these flowers, and these are the 2 that I have chosen. So the main thing that I am using for these flowers are these cookie sheets from Dollar Tree. They come in a 2-pack, and they're basically just heavy aluminum foil. I picked up 4 packages of these for the large flower, so a total of 8 trays. I cut out some patterns for my flower petals, and I will put a link in the description box below to a pattern that you can download for these. I'll also be using some chalk paint in the color Elephant and also in the color Truffle. These are Waverly chalk paints, and I picked these up at Walmart for about $5 a bottle. You also need 1 piece of foam core board, and you can pick this up at Dollar Tree. I'll be using an old pair of scissors, a pen, paintbrush, some paper towels, and it's not shown in this picture, but also a box cutter. You can just use hot glue for this project, but if you want it to be stronger or you're going to put it outside, I would highly recommend using something like E6000. For the center of the flower, I'm going to be using some paints that I've actually had for a really, really long time. Kind of a gold color, antique gold color, and then a burnt sienna, and then some gold sparkle paint that I have just to add a little bit of shine to it. You can use any colors that you want for the center. I just chose these colors because I thought it would look a little bit more like the inspiration piece. If you want to use these outside, I would recommend gluing 2 of the trays together with E6000, and you can just put E6000 on there and then put the other tray on top, and then weight it down with some books or something heavy until it dries, just to give it a little bit more stability. I am not doing that for my flower because I'm just going to put them inside, but if you do want to put them outside, I would highly recommend that you do this. And of course, you would need to buy twice as many trays if you're going to do this. The first step is to cut off the outside edge all the way around the trays, And when you're cutting these trays, you need to be really careful because it can be sharp. But one reason I chose to do it with this instead of buying actual tin is because I hate working with tin and tin snips, and you have to wear gloves, and it's just really sharp and hard to manipulate. And so I wanted something that was a lot easier to work with. And so I chose these because you can cut them, you don't have to wear gloves, and you can just cut them with scissors, and it's a lot safer. So I'm just going to trace my pattern using a pen or a pencil, and I found with the large petals I could get 4 on a sheet, and then I just put 2 or left 2 of the sheets together and cut them out at the same time, and it was really easy to cut through 2 thicknesses of this with the scissors. Then I'm going to paint my petals to make them look more like galvanized metal. So I'm going to use the elephant chalk paint, and I'm just going to really kind of sloppily put paint on these, just brush it kind of all over, and then I'm going to use paper towel to kind of blot it and spread it around. And I do want some of the shiny metal to shine through the paint, so you don't want to cover it all the way. And I'm just going to repeat this process for all of the petals. And this is a little bit time consuming, but I just put in a movie and just went at it, and it took a total of probably about 3 hours from start to finish to create this flower. Once all the petals are painted with the elephant paint and they're dry, then I'm going to take the truffle colored chalk paint, and I'm just going to use this to add some rust-like effects to the petals. And it doesn't show up as much in the video as it does in real life here, but I'm just kind of lightly brushing along all the edges, and then even in the center I added a little bit more to the tops and the bottoms of the petals, and just tried to do a little bit of random placement of this paint because rust is just kind of wherever, so I wanted to make it look a little bit more realistic. Once my petals were all painted, I laid them out to see about how large I wanted to make the center of the flower, and this is about 6.5 inches in diameter, which is what this flower pot is. So I'm just going to use this as my pattern or template to cut out the center of the flower. I'll be cutting the center of the flower out of this foam board that you can pick up at Dollar Tree, and I'm just using that flower pot as my template, and then I'll just cut it out using my razor knife. I also need a larger circle that I'm going to use for the back of the flower to glue all of the petals onto. This is not going to show, and I did not measure it exactly. I just used the center of the flower as kind of a guide and made it about 2 inches larger all the way around. I also cut out a larger circle of the aluminum trays, and then I'm going to take some fiberfill that I had on hand. You could use probably tissue or fabric or paper towel or something just to give it a little bit more dimension. I'm just going to glue that onto the center and then place that upside down on the tin, and then fold that up all the way around just to create the center of the flower. And I did find that I needed to use hot glue and secure that. Just be careful when you're doing this because the hot glue makes the tin really hot, and so I used a little tool to help press down the tin or the foil so that I wouldn't burn my fingers. I did actually accidentally bend my foil right here, and at first I was kind of bummed, but after I got it all painted and I had it finished, I really liked the way it looked. I thought it just gave it a little bit more of a realistic look. Now I'm going to paint the center of my flower. I'm just going to use the antique gold paint that I had and just paint the whole thing gold at first. When the gold is dry, I'm going to come in with the burnt sienna and I'm just dabbing it along the edges at first. I can always add more, but I'm starting with a light coat and putting a little bit more around the very edge and a little bit lighter as I work in toward the center of the flower. And so I do put a few little strokes in the center of the flower and try to accent where that dent is as well. Then I'm going to take the truffle chalk paint and add a little bit more around the very edges and on that dent, and just a little bit in the center of the flower as well. I wanted to add some curl to my petals, and I found the best way to do this was with a rolling pin, and if you want more curl, you just press harder. Next, I'm going to trace the center of my flower on that larger piece of foam core that we cut out, just to give me a reference kind of where I want to glue the petals down. And when I start my first row, I just want to make sure that the end of the petal is down past the center of the flower. If you're going to put these outside, I would recommend using E6000 and then a little bit of hot glue to help adhere it. Again, be careful, the hot glue does make the tin pretty warm. I did a couple petals using the E6000 and then decided I was not going to put these outside, so I just went to strictly using my hot glue gun. Once the outside layer of petals was glued on, then I just took the smaller petals and went around bringing them in toward the center a little bit more and glued them on in the same way. This step is totally optional. I just decided I wanted the center to stick up a little bit more, and so I added some of these felt pads from Dollar Tree in the center, and that just held it up a little bit more and gave it a little bit more height. Then I just added some hot glue to the top of those felt pads and glued the center of the flower directly on top. For a hanger, I just took a little piece of twine and then glued it to the back of the flower, and this made a really simple and effective hanger. And this is my finished flower, and I am really happy with how it turned out. Now I'm going to show you how to make the flower on the left. For this flower, we will be using 3 different sizes of petals, and they are made exactly like the other petals were made as far as cutting them out and painting them. I will put the link to the pattern for these petals in the description box as well. We'll use 10 of the large petals, 10 of the medium-sized petals, and 16 of the small petals. And for the small ones, we're going to paint 8 of them in the finish that you see here, just like all the other petals, and then 8 of them are going to be painted in a different finish, which I will show you next. For the center of the flower, I'm going to use this Rust-Oleum hammered metallic paint. It's kind of in a oil rubbed bronze finish, and I'm just going to spray paint these, and I'm not going to give them a real heavy coat, just kind of a light painting so that some of the silver shows through a little bit too. And I'm going to spray paint both the front and the back of these because they are going to be curled over, so you will see both sides. Once the spray paint is dried, I'm going to take my elephant chalk paint and just brush a little bit of it on the edges and the top and bottom, like I did on all of the other petals as well, just to give it a little bit more of depth and dimension. For this flower, I want the petals to have a definite crease down the center, So here I'm using a paint stirring stick. You could use a ruler or any other straight edge, and I'm folding the petal in half and just shaping it a little bit more, and this gives it a different look than that first flower that I made. So here I have all of my petals prepped. They are all painted and creased and ready to assemble. For the back of this flower, I cut out another 6.5-inch diameter circle out of foam core board, and that's what I'm going to use to glue the petals on for this flower. For the center of the flower, I'm going to take 6 of those spray painted petals and put those around in the center, just like I've been doing for all the other petals. And then I'm going to take the 2 remaining petals and I'm going to use those to cover up the remaining white foam core. So I'm just going to put one kind of over half of that remaining white circle in the center and the other one over the other half. And then I'll just curl those center pieces in to make it look more like the center of a flower. I have to say, I really love how this turned out. This is definitely my favorite of the 2 that I've made. So once again, here was my inspiration, $218 for this set of 5. I figured out that mine that I made, if you calculated out the cost per flower, the inspiration would be $44 each, and I created mine for just $6 each. Now I did have some of the supplies on hand, but even if you had to buy everything I've shown you, it would cost about $36 to make the whole set of 5 flowers. So once I finish my set of 5 flowers, I will have saved $182.
I do have another video where I show how to make these flowers a little more sturdy to put outside, and in that video I make this rose flower. I will put the link in the description box below so that you can check out that video. I didn't want to include it here since I'd already shown these other 2 flowers, but if you are interested in that, I will have the link for you. So my inspiration piece is this 3-tier hanging basket wall rack from Wayfair. It's on sale for $74, regularly $104. Mine is going to be a bit smaller, but a whole lot cheaper. I'm going to use these 3 wire baskets from Dollar Tree. And I'll be using 2 of these 5-gallon paint stir sticks. I picked this 3-pack up at Walmart for $1.47. I'll also be using these little clip-on chalkboards from Dollar Tree, as well as this little wooden home word that I found in the Crafter's Square aisle at Dollar Tree. And to assemble this, I'm going to be using my Stanley staple gun. First, I'm going to be staining the 2 paint sticks I'm going to be using, and you could just use regular stain for this, but if you don't have stain, you can use some brown acrylic paint and water it down, and then just paint it on like you would stain and wipe off the excess. And the more you water it down, the lighter it will be. And just remember, you can keep building and making it darker, but it's harder to make it lighter. Most of the paint will soak into the wood, but if you do have any excess, just wipe it off with a paper towel. Next, I'm putting a scrap piece of wood on my desk to protect it from the staple gun because I'm not sure how far these staples are going to go in. And I'm going to draw a guide on this wood board to help me line up my paint sticks. So I'm just measuring how far apart I need the sticks to be and marking that, and then I'm going to draw some lines so that I can continue to line those up as I am working on the project. Once I have my guidelines, I'm going to lay my paint sticks down and then place my basket. The first one is going to go right at the very bottom, and then I'm going to use my staple gun to attach that top rim of the basket to the paint sticks. Then I'm going to paint the staples black so that they blend in with the baskets better. I figured out I wanted about 3 inches between each of the baskets, and so I'm measuring so that I have 3 inches between the top of one basket to the bottom of the next. I found it helpful to place a heavy object on the top of those paint sticks just to help hold them in place while I was stapling the baskets down. And if you've seen very many of my DIY videos, you know I use this Sherlock Holmes book a lot because it is a really heavy book. Once I have my baskets attached, then I'm going to drill a hole in the top of each of those paint sticks. And then I'm going to take some jute twine and thread that through to make a hanger to hang this up. Another option would be to put some picture hangers on the back of this or use command strips to hang it up. And I'm using a double strand of twine just to make it a little bit stronger. The inspiration piece did not have any embellishments or anything on it, and I thought it was kind of plain, and when I saw this little wooden home word at Dollar Tree, I thought that would be really cute to add to the top of this. And at first I thought about leaving it the natural color, but then I decided I wanted to add a little pop of color. So I am going to use this Cascade Color Folk Art acrylic paint and paint the home sign. And I am being careful just to paint the very front of this because the sides of this are kind of a stained finish already, and I really like that. I think it gives it a little bit more depth and a three-dimensional look, so I am just painting the top of this word. Once the paint is dry on my home word, then I'm going to use some hot glue and attach it to the top of the paint sticks. And I think it's really cute the way it is, but just for an added touch, I am going to take these little clip-on chalkboard tags from Dollar Tree and add them to the front of the baskets. And this project is great because you can store just about anything in these and just label the tags the way you would like. I put mine in our dining room, and I have some salt and pepper in the top, and then some napkins, and then some of our favorite seasonings, and it just looks really cute with this grouping of other things that I have hanging in my dining room. Next I'm going to show you how I made my own version of this topiary door decor.
For this project I will be using one of these pots that come in a 3-pack from Dollar Tree, this 6.5-inch boxwood ball that I got at Hobby Lobby, and with my 40% off coupon it was about $5. I also picked up a package of these paper stem wires from Walmart. It was 88 cents for this package and it had like 7 or 8 pieces in it. And then I'm going to be using some moss. I got this Spanish moss at Dollar Tree. And also some burlap ribbon. This is the wired ribbon that I got from Dollar Tree. I'll be using some paint that I have on hand. This is ivory and truffle colors of Waverly chalk paint that I got at Walmart. I'll be using a piece of cardboard, and this needs to be as tall as the pot is. So just not a real big piece of cardboard, just something that is as tall as the pot. And then my supplies is a ruler, a Sharpie, a box cutter, my hot glue gun and glue sticks, scissors, and paintbrush. Oh, and you'll also need a good pair of wire cutters as well. So the first step is to take one of the plastic planters from Dollar Tree, and I need to figure out how to cut this exactly in half. So I decided to cut a circle the same diameter as the top of the pot, and then I'm just going to fold it over so that I can see exactly what half of that is. Then I'm just going to place it on top of the pot and mark it with a Sharpie so that I know where the halfway point is. And then there are lines on the pot that make it really easy to see where to cut. And I was going to use the razor knife for this, but I actually found that a pair of scissors worked much better to cut the sides of the pot. When you get to the bottom of the pot, though, I found that I did have to use the razor knife, as this was quite a bit harder to cut through. And you just want to be really careful doing this because it is a little bit awkward. Now I'm going to take my cardboard and I'm just going to trace the inside of the pot because I want the cardboard to fit inside. And so then I'm just going to cut out the cardboard piece and I will hot glue it inside the pot to make a back. Then I'm going to take my ivory chalk paint and just paint a couple of coats on the pot, and I'll just let it dry in between each coat, and making sure to paint both the bottom of the pot and a little bit inside the pot as well. Then I'm going to take this greenery ball that I got at Hobby Lobby, and it just has zip ties that hold two halves together. So this made it perfect for this project because I just took my wire cutters and cut those zip ties and pulled the two halves apart, and it was basically already done for me. This made this project so much easier than gluing greenery onto a styrofoam ball. I did have one little piece that came off while I was separating the ball, but I just hot glued it back on. For the stem, I'm going to be using 4 of these paper twist wires. I'm going to take 2 and twist them together fairly tightly. Then I'll take the third one and twist it a little more loosely around the 2 that I just twisted together. And then I'm going to take the 4th one and basically just place it next to the ones I've twisted together, and then I'll secure them all at the top with a little bit of hot glue. I felt like doing it this way made it look a little more natural. Once the paint on my pot is dry, then I'm just going to take a little bit of my brown truffle colored chalk paint and just very lightly dry brush onto the pot, and it will just kind of highlight the raised embossed areas of the pot and just give it a little bit more of an aged look. Then I'm going to attach the greenery ball to my stem, and to do this I'm just going to poke the stem through the bottom of the greenery ball and into the top, and it fits perfectly in these little sections, and then I'm just going to add a little bit of hot glue to secure it. Then I need to decide how tall I want the stem to be, and I noticed in the sample one that the stem that stuck up above the pot was about the same height as the pot. This pot is 4 inches, which means I would need my total stem to be 8 inches, but I actually wanted it to be a little taller, so I made mine 10 inches. Then I'm just marking where the center of the pot is so that I know where to glue my stem in so that it's centered. Next, I'm just going to add quite a bit of hot glue down the center of the inside of the pot, and then I will hold the stem on that, and I actually used a pair of scissors to help hold that down in place so that I wouldn't burn my fingers. Once the glue is set, then I'm just going to take my Spanish moss and I'll add some hot glue to the inside of the pot, and I'm going to stuff the moss in fairly tightly just to help hold it in and just make everything nice and secure. Then I'll just take my scissors and trim off some of those crazy moss pieces that are sticking out and make it look nice. Next I'm going to make my bow, and I'm using the burlap ribbon, and I'm just going to make a loop the size that I want my bow to be, and then take another piece of the burlap ribbon and decide how long I want my ends, and then I'll just place the loop on top and tie it all together with a piece of twine. And I did make the twine long enough that I can use it to tie it around the stem of the topiary as well. And when I get the bow placed where I want it, then I just add a little hot glue to that twine and trim the ends off. Then I'm also going to trim the ends of my bow, and I'm just folding them in half and then cutting at an angle to make a nice finished end on the bow. So this is what it should look like on the back. It's basically flat so that it will lay up against a door or a wall. You could even put this on a shutter. It's just a really cute decor piece. And the cool thing is that I have pretty much everything I need to create another one, because I have half of the greenery ball and half of the planter, and so I could make a set of these. I did decide to add just a little jute hanger that I tied around this just to make it a little bit easier to hang up. Next, I'm going to show you how to make some high-end planters using pots that you can pick up from Dollar Tree. The past few years, Dollar Tree has really been increasing the amount and styles and sizes of pots and planters that they have been carrying, so there's a wide variety to choose from. Besides my planters, I will be using some three-dimensional puffy paint. This is some I picked up at Hobby Lobby for $1.29 per bottle. It doesn't matter what color because we are going to be painting over it. And so I will be using for my paint some various colors of chalk paint. I will also be using some clear sealers. I will be using a matte finish on one planter and a glossy finish on another. And then I'll also be using some paper towel and paintbrush and a sponge. I'm going to start with this little planter, and if the planter you're using has a slick surface, you will want to go over it with some sandpaper just to rough it up. And then I'm taking my three-dimensional puffy paint and I'm just going to freehand a design on here. This is a rose pattern that I saw on the Pottery Barn website that I'm kind of recreating, but you could do this in any type of pattern. You can make it as simple or as elaborate as you want. You can even draw the pattern on your planter before you go over it with the puffy paint, if that makes it easier. One tip I found out here is that you do want to squeeze out a fairly good amount of the puffy paint. You want a nice thick bead on this so that you get a good three-dimensional design. And the puffy paint will flatten out a little bit as it dries, so that's why it's good to do a nice thick bead. Once you have your design on your planter, you want to let it dry completely. I did let mine dry overnight, and then I'm going to go in with my ivory colored chalk paint and paint my planter. And I did use 2 coats of paint to make sure it had a nice uh, coverage on this and it got into all of the crevices. I decided before I do my next layer of paint on this planter that it would be good to do a really light coat of matte sealer on this just to help this first coat of paint be sealed on there. I don't want to do a real heavy coat because I want to make sure that my next layer of paint will adhere to the planter, but I thought this might just help kind of everything stay where it's supposed to be. Once that sealer is dry, I'm going to take my truffle colored chalk paint and some water. I'm going to get my brush really wet and just get a little bit of the truffle paint on my paintbrush, and then I'm going to kind of do a wash over the whole entire planter. So it's kind of like a stain almost, but this is something you can do as light or as dark as you would like to. I decided that I wanted mine to be a little bit darker, so I went over it a couple of times. I'm kind of going for that old world or Tuscan look. I just want it to look really antique or aged. Once this is dry, then I'm going to take a damp sponge and I'm going to lightly go over my planter. I'm trying to remove some of the paint that is on the raised areas of that puffy paint design that I put on here, just so that the design will stand out a little bit more. You can remove as little or as much as you want to. If you remove too much, you can always add some of the truffle or the darker kind of stain color back in, but I'm just removing just a little bit just to bring out that design. So here is what my planter looks like on the outside. I really love how this came out. It just is a really beautiful design. And I'm going to go ahead and add some of that brown paint on the inside rim of my planter so that it is all uniform. And then once it's all completely dry, I'll go ahead and give it a couple coats of the matte clear sealer just to finish it off. For this next high-end planter, I am going to be making a faux concrete looking planter, and I'm going to use the puffy paint again for this. The design I'm putting on this is some cattails and some dragonflies. Again, I'm just freehanding it. You can put any design on here you want, and you just want to make sure that you are using a good amount of the puffy paint so you get a nice, good three-dimensional design. This design is one that I saw on birchlane.com on a set of 3 large planters that they had. Now, they wanted over $800 for that set of 3 planters. Obviously, this planter is much smaller, but you could use this same technique on larger planters and make some for outdoors, and you would still only spend a few dollars to do that. It certainly wouldn't be anywhere near $800. So again, I let my 3D puffy paint dry overnight, and I didn't show it here, but I did spray the whole planter with my matte sealer so that my paint would stick to it a little bit better. And then I'm just going over the entire planter using my elephant or gray colored chalk paint because I am going for a concrete looking planter. Once this paint is dry, I'm going to take some light gray craft paint and a dry brush, and then I am going to very lightly dry brush over the design on the planter. I'm going to go over the entire planter just really lightly, trying to highlight that 3D puffy paint design that I put on there. And it's okay if some of the paint gets on the planter where the design is not. It's just going to give it kind of that cement look, and this is just going to highlight that design. And again, this is something that you can do as light or as dark as you would like. I think adding some of the dry brushing to areas on the pot where there is no design helps with the concrete look of the pot. And then, of course, when you're all finished with that and that's all dry, you do want to spray this with the matte sealer. You don't want to use a glossy finish because you do want this to look like concrete. So the matte finish is definitely best. So if you'd like a high-end look, but you want something a little easier than doing the design with the 3D puffy paint, here's a hack for you. Pick up a planter from Dollar Tree that already has some type of raised design on it, like this one. And then just go ahead and paint your planter the color that you would want. And I'm going to show you a couple different options or different looks for this same planter. This one I'm painting with the gray or elephant colored chalk paint again to get that concrete look. On the other side of the planter, I am going to paint it with the ivory colored chalk paint just to show you 2 different looks. I'll go back later and paint the whole pot one color, but I wanted to show you how different the 2 looks can be. So on the gray side, I'm going to take that light gray craft paint again and just lightly dry brush over that whole design, and that will bring out that raised design and make it show up more and give it kind of the concrete look. On the ivory colored side, I'm going to take some of the brown or the truffle colored chalk paint, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to dry brush over the design to bring that out. And by doing the ivory colored with the brown chalk paint dry brushing, this is going to give it more of a farmhouse look. So on this, the technique is super simple and you still come out with a really high-end look. Large wreaths can be very pricey, so I'm going to show you how to make one on a budget.
For this project, I will be using a hula hoop from Dollar Tree, and this is the smaller size. It is about 20 inches in diameter. If you want to make a larger wreath, you can use the bigger hula hoop as well. I will also be using one package of these 5-gallon paint stir sticks. These are from Walmart. I think they're about $1.47. And I'll be using this wall decal from Dollar Tree. I will be using some jute twine. This is some I got at Walmart. It's a large roll for $3.47, I think. You can also get smaller rolls at Dollar Tree. And I think you would probably need at least 2 for this project if you use the small ones from Dollar Tree. I'm going to be using 2 of these large eucalyptus stems from Walmart. These were $3 a piece, but they're a real good size, so I only need 2 of them. And I'm going to use some artificial flowers. These are some that we actually used in my daughter's wedding to decorate the arch. And so they have special meaning, and I have them just laying around. So I'm going to use these, but you could use some from Dollar Tree or Walmart. To start, I am going to take the foil tape off of the outside of the hula hoop, and I'm using an X-Acto knife just to lift up the edge, and then it just peels up. It was a little hard to get started, but after that it just peeled right off. And you probably could leave this tape on, but I decided to take it off since I'm going to be gluing the twine to the hula hoop. I wanted it to glue directly to the plastic hoop. But you could use just the hoop with this nice dark charcoal gray color just the way it is. So I want mine to be a little bit more farmhouse, so I am going to use twine, and I did decide to take the beads out of the hula hoop. It probably wouldn't matter because it's going to be hanging up on the wall and not being moved around, but I just decided it was easy to do, so I just pulled the ends apart and dumped the little beads out and threw them away. I am hot gluing my twine to start off. I'm gluing it right where the hoop goes together at that seam, just because I think that will help hold that together, and then I just added a fairly generous amount of glue at the beginning, and then I am just wrapping the twine, and I did not glue it again until I got to the very end. Wrapping the twine can be a little bit tedious. It does take quite a while to do, but I found that it was easiest if I left the twine on the roll and then just wrapped that around and around the hoop. Like about 5 or 6 times. Then I pulled the twine tight and just continued that process all the way around the hoop. And once I got to the end, then I just trimmed off the twine and hot glued it down. So if you did not want a farmhouse look, you could totally spray paint this hoop in like a metallic if you want it to be more glam, or even just a white or a black if you want it to look a little more modern. There's a lot of options for making this fit your decor. So next I'm going to assemble my paint stir sticks into a sign for my wreath. And I'm going to lay them kind of in the position that I want and mark the end of them to trim them off because they are just a little bit too long. And now you can see they fit perfectly, and don't worry about those ends of the stir sticks that are smaller because they're going to be covered up with the florals. Next I'm going to use some ivory colored chalk paint by Waverly. I get this at Walmart, and I'm going to paint my stir sticks, and then I'll be using some truffle colored chalk paint just to dry brush to make them look a little bit aged. I did end up putting 2 coats of paint on these. It probably wasn't necessary, but I felt like it just needed a little bit more than the 1 coat. And I didn't worry about painting the backs of these. Once the paint is dry, I'm going to flip these over and I'm going to use some craft sticks just to glue across the backs to hold them together. And I'm just trimming them with scissors and then hot gluing them to the back, making sure that my edges are lined up and that the stir sticks are together tightly. So once I got all the craft sticks glued on, I flipped this over and realized that I had my paint stir sticks in the wrong order. So I ended up having to pry off the craft sticks, and that was not very easy. But I used the heat gun to help me get those off, and then I had to put them in the correct order and flip them over. The problem I had the first time was that I flipped each stick individually instead of flipping them all together at one time. And so I got that figured out here and got it all put together. But you know, sometimes things just happen and you gotta roll with it. So now that I have that together, I am going to do my dry brushing, and I am just using that truffle brown paint. You can use any color of darker paint. It could be a gray, it could be a brown, or even a black, but you just want to get a very little bit on a dry paintbrush and then wipe the excess off of the brush and then lightly brush across your project just to leave a little bit on the project, and this gives it an aged look. Now I'm going to attach the wall sticker to my sign, and I picked this up at Dollar Tree. They have a lot of different styles. I really liked the looks of this one, and so when I put this on, I am cheating it over to the right hand side a little bit because my greenery is going to go on the left hand side and I don't want it to cover up the word, so instead of centering it on the sign, I'm moving it over to the right a little bit. Now since there is a little bit of shine or gloss to this and I want it to look a little bit more farmhouse, I'm going to use some matte spray, and I am going to spray a couple coats of that on my sign, and that will help take a little bit of the sheen away from it. It's not so shiny. Once that matte sealer is dry, then I'm going to use my hot glue gun and just glue that sign onto the hoop. Next, I'm going to lay out my greenery and my flowers onto the hoop and decide the placement of them, and then I'm just going to be attaching them with some pieces of jute twine. I think that will blend in well with my hoop. You could use zip ties or floral wire or any type of wire or string, but for this particular project I thought the jute twine would be a good way to go. I did leave the long ends of my florals and greenery sticking out. That will be the last thing that I do, is to take care of those ends, but I want to make sure that I have them all placed properly and that the ends are long enough that they won't just slip out after I tie them. So once I'm happy with the way it looks, I'm going to kind of fold those ends along the hoop and tie them, leaving about a 4 or 5 inch length of the stems just so that I can tie it in a couple of places and it'll be nice and secure. And then I'm going to trim off the excess with some wire cutters. And I really liked how the twine looked wrapped around the center where my florals met right there at the sign. So I took a little bit longer piece of twine and wrapped it around multiple times just to give it a little bit more of an accent. And then I tied it on the back and gave it a little bit of hot glue to secure it. And that is it. My wreath is finished and I love how it looks. You know, I saw some wreaths this size on Etsy for over $100. I spent about $15 to make this one and I love it and I think it turned out great.
Next, I'm going to show you another version of this wreath, but this time instead of covering it with the jute twine, I painted it and decorated it a little bit differently.
For this project, I will be using a hula hoop from Dollar Tree, and this is the smaller size. I'll also be using this wooden letter that I picked up at Walmart for $1.97. In their craft section, they had all of the letters to choose from, and these are just unfinished wooden letters. I'll also be using 2 bunches of the lamb's ear from Walmart. These are 97 cents each, and there are 2 stems in each bunch. I picked up 4 of these lavender and white greenery bouquets from Dollar Tree to use for this project. And you can choose any florals and color scheme that you want to do to make it your own. I'm going to be using some of this black and white checked wide wired ribbon that I picked up at Hobby Lobby after Christmas. I got this on sale and it's not Christmas ribbon really. I can use it all year long and there's 75 feet on this roll and I got it for 40% off, so this was a great deal.
I'll also be using a little bit of jute twine.
And for paint, I will be using Waverly chalk paint in the colors ivory and ink. Basically just an off-white and a black.
So just like in the previous project, I am going to remove the foil tape that is wrapped around the hula hoop so that I only have the plastic hoop to work with. Since the hoop is already a dark black or charcoal color, I'm just going to take my ivory chalk paint and a dry brush and dry brush around the hoop just to give it a little bit more of a farmhouse look.
For those of you who are new to crafting, dry brushing just means you take a dry brush with a very little bit of paint on it and just lightly go over your project so that just a little bit of paint gets left on it and it gives it that aged or distressed look. I'm going to set the hoop aside and then I am going to paint my monogram letter. And I did sand this a little bit. It had some rough edges and spots, so I just took a piece of sandpaper and went over it and smoothed it out a little bit. And then I'm going to paint the whole letter in the ivory chalk paint. And I did paint the sides and the back of this as well. Once the letter is dry, then I am going to take some of the ink colored chalk paint and I'm going to take my brush and again I'm going to dry brush on my letter just to give it that distressed and aged look. And then I'm also going to go over the edges and kind of the corners of the letter a little bit darker because I just want to accentuate that and bring it out so that the letter shows up more. So now that both my hoop and my letter are painted and dry, I am going to give them both a good coat or a couple of coats of this clear matte sealer just to protect them. So I pulled apart those 2 bunches of lamb's ear, so now I have 4 stems, and I also have 4 stems of those lavender and white greenery bunches from Dollar Tree. And I'm just going to divide them equally to use on each side of the wreath. For those of you who are not used to doing florals or arranging florals, this is a really easy way to do it. And so you could pull these apart, glue things on individually, but I just wanted to show you a really easy way to do this. So I'm going to layer these. I'm going to start with one of the lamb's ear, and then I am going to use some floral wire. You could use twine, you could use zip ties, you could even use like the little twisty bread ties, just anything you have to attach it. I am going to be using some floral wire that I just had on hand. So I'm laying this on the wreath so that it is going up the wreath about halfway. And I do want to say here, you want to put the little part of the hula hoop where the ends come together down at the bottom so that it's going to be covered up with all your florals and bow. You don't want that at the top where it's going to be seen. So I am going to start with just wrapping my wire around. Then I'm going to add one of the floral greenery bunches on top and wire that on. And I'm not really making these super secure. This is more of just a little bit of a temporary hold until I get everything in place, and then I'll be adding some hot glue to hold everything down. Then I'm going to layer another stem of lamb's ear and then another floral stem, and so I'll have a total of 4 stems on each side, and I'm leaving about 2 to 3 inches between the seam of the hula hoop and where the greenery starts, just so that I have a place for my bow to fit nicely. And then I'm going to repeat this process on the other side. Now I'm going to pull some of the lamb's ear leaves up through the florals and some of the florals up through the lamb's ear leaves, just to mix them up and make them look more natural. I want to have a nice full bow in the center of this, so I'm using this wide wired ribbon, and I am going to make the bow and then I'll attach it to that center part in between the florals. When I make my bows, I always leave the ribbon on the spool because I don't like to waste ribbon, and this will ensure that I'll have enough ribbon to make the size bow that I want. So I am going to figure out the size that I want. So now that I've determined the size of my loops, I'm going to loop my ribbon back and forth. And a tip here is if you have one-sided ribbon, you will just make a twist in the center each time before you do a loop so that the right side of the ribbon is always facing out. But since this ribbon is the same on both sides, I don't have to worry about that. So I'm just making sure my loops are the size that I want. I'm doing 5 loops on each side with 1 center loop at the end. And then I will use a piece of wire. You could use a chenille stem, or otherwise known as a pipe cleaner, or another piece of ribbon, just something to tie your bow to hold it. And then I'm going to fluff it up, make sure that it looks good. Before I cut it off the spool, I'm going to make sure that I'm happy with how it looks and the size of it. Before I attach my bow, I do want to go back and add some hot glue to the florals to make sure that they are nice and secured to the hula hoop. And then I will take some wire cutters and just trim off a little bit of those stems that are sticking out. And I'll secure the ends of those with a little extra hot glue as well. So now I'm going to attach my bow, and I like to use something a little bit longer when I tie off my bow. so that I can just use that same piece of wire or ribbon to tie the bow onto my project. So that's what I'm going to do. I use just some floral wire, and I'm going to wrap that around the hula hoop and twist it so that it's nice and tight, and then I will secure that with some extra hot glue as well. I'm also going to turn the wreath over and just add a little bit of extra hot glue over the top of that wire on the back side to make sure the bow is nice and secure. The last step is to attach my monogram letter on, and for this I am using some jute twine. I just cut about a 16-inch piece and I folded it in half. I'm taking the loop behind the hoop hanging down and then just pulling the ends through, and depending on the letter that you use, you may attach yours differently. I thought about doing it this way, and then I thought, no, I think it will hang better if I just do it one long piece down the center of the letter. So that's how I decided to hang mine. Like I said, depending on what letter you use, you may want to hang it a little bit differently. So this is how I glued mine on, and once that's finished, then this project is done.
You can make this next project in just a few minutes with just a couple of items. For this project, I will be using this shelf from Dollar Tree, and you could use any style shelf and basically do the same thing that I'll be doing in this DIY. I'll also be using this set of home letters that I got at Dollar Tree today. I'll be using a few of these tumbling tower blocks, but you can use just some other little wood blocks instead if you don't have the tumbling tower blocks. And then I'm going to be using some linen white chalk paint, and I'm going to start my project just by painting the front of my home letters using that paint. It's really only necessary to paint the fronts of these, but if you like to have it completely finished, then go ahead and paint the front and the back. After my paint is dry, I am going to take a little bit of black chalk paint, and I'm going to use a dry brush and just a very tiny little bit of paint and just lightly brush onto these. Dry brushing this just gives it that worn, aged look and adds a little bit of texture to it. Now I'm going to take my shelf and just raise up those side wires that are used to hang the shelf. And along the back edge of the shelf, I'm going to take some of these tumbling tower blocks and just line them up, and I'm going to glue them flush with the back of the shelf. And I am making sure that my blocks are not longer than my word is going to be because you don't want them to show. So they are just going to be an extra support to help glue these letters to so that they'll stand up. And I'm just using a little bit of hot glue on this. These letters are so light that there's not going to be a lot of pressure on this, so hot glue is more than adequate for this. Now that I have my blocks glued on, I am going to glue my letters to those blocks, and I'm again just using a little bit of hot glue, and you do want to maybe kind of lay these out prior to gluing them down. So you know I got mine a little off and I ended up having to overlap my H letter just a little bit. honestly, I kind of like the way it looked overlapped, and I kind of wish I had overlapped a couple of them. But, live and learn. So you might want to do that if you make this as well. This was such an easy project, and I really love how it turned out. In fact, I might make a couple of these to make a set, but I am just really happy with this. Next, I'll be making this fun decorative tray. For this project, I will be using this unfinished wood hexagon tray that I picked up for $5 from Family Dollar. And I'll be using this super cute fabric that I found at Dollar Tree with the bees and the mason jars and the chicken wire design. I love that. It's so cute. I'll also be using some matte finish Mod Podge and a couple of these handles. I've had these for a while. I think I picked them up at Home Depot for, I don't know, between $1 and $2 each. And I forgot to say that I will be using some black chalk paint. This is Waverly chalk paint that I picked up at Walmart in the color ink. And so I'm just going to paint my tray using this black paint. Now, I didn't paint the bottom of the inside of the tray because I thought it might be better for adhering the fabric with the Mod Podge if I didn't paint it, but you could paint it if you want to, and it would probably be all right. Once my black paint is dry, I am going to go in with a little bit of linen white chalk paint and this chip brush and just put a very little bit of paint on the dry brush and go over my tray lightly just to give it some dry brushing marks. This just really adds some texture and gives it a little bit of a worn look. This is a great way to get that farmhouse look. Next, I'm going to take my fabric and I'm going to lay it inside of my tray and just push it down and get it flattened out as best I can. Now, you could just set your tray on top of the fabric and trace around it, but then you would have to cut out your hexagon a little bit smaller so it would fit inside the tray. I decided to try it this way and it worked okay. I did have a couple of little places where my fabric was just a little bit too small, but overall it worked pretty well and you can't really tell once the tray's finished. So I'm just putting the fabric in and smoothing it out. Then I'm going to trace around it using a pencil and then cut out my hexagon. So I'm going to lay my fabric in the tray, make sure it fits and that it is the right direction. And then I am going to use my Mod Podge and put a generous layer of Mod Podge on the bottom of the tray. Then I will place my fabric on top of that and smooth it out. And I am using this tool that I use for my Cricut, but you can just smooth it out, even like using a credit card or something to get any wrinkles out and smooth it into the edges and the corners. Then I'm going to take the Mod Podge and go over the top of the fabric with a generous coat and make sure to get all of the edges and corners sealed down really well. Next, I'm going to attach my handles, and to do this, I am going to use a combination of E6000 for a really strong hold and some hot glue just to hold it on until that E6000 can dry. So I'm just eyeballing this. I'm not measuring these, but I'm just centering it on one side. And then I will glue the other handle on straight across on the other side of the tray.
And I love my finished tray. I think this would be so cute for serving tea with honey or just to use as a decorative tray on a table, but I'm really happy with this. Next, I'm going to show you how to make this faux iron heart and then how to use multiple hearts to make this beautiful wall medallion.
For this project, you will need 2 of these garden fence pieces found in the gardening section at Dollar Tree, some craft paint. I think that this chalk paint from Waverly in the color of ivory works really well, and you can find this at Walmart. I believe it's about $4. You will need a hot glue gun and glue sticks, and some tools that you will need or that might be helpful are a box cutter, wire cutters, scissors, a paintbrush, sandpaper, and I would recommend a cutting board as well. First, we're going to cut the garden fence pieces out in some specific shapes to create our heart. So the first one that we're going to do is what I'm calling the main piece, and it's going to be the top of the heart. You can just use a good pair of scissors to cut this, but I did find it helpful to use the wire cutters in several places. Just the angle that you need to cut in some places, different tools work better. I even found that in some places using the box cutter to kind of score it before I cut it with scissors or the wire cutters was helpful. And then you just want to trim off any rough edges, and this is what the first piece looks like, or the main piece. Then you'll need to cut 3 of these X-shaped pieces with the arrow sticking out of one end. Unfortunately, you can't get all the pieces out of one garden fence. You will have to use the second garden fence to get your third X. You will need to leave one of the X pieces exactly like it is, and then the other 2 we're going to cut them apart. And the way we're going to cut it is just right down the center, but leave the arrow on one side. So you're going to have a C-shaped piece, and then the other one will be a C-shaped piece with the arrow on it. And so this is what it should look like. And you will do this with 2 of the X pieces. It's important when you cut these apart that you end up with the 2 C-shaped pieces with the arrows in them, so that they will sit this way with the arrows on the outside edge. So you will have 6 pieces total, and this is what they should look like. Once you have your pieces cut, you'll want to take your scissors and just trim off any rough edges or pointy edges and try to make them look rounded and more uniform. And I found that in some of the thicker places the wire cutters worked well, but most of the time you could just use your scissors. Then just take a piece of sandpaper and sand off any rough edges. So I'm not sure what happened to the video of me gluing these first 2 pieces together, but you'll just take the big main piece and then glue the X on top of it with the arrow pointing down like you see here. You will want to make sure that your center line of the main piece and the arrow all line up in a straight line. Then you're going to take the C pieces that have the arrow on them, and you're going to lay the arrow part over the top of those curls at the bottom of that X piece. and you'll just have to kind of play with it till you get it in position. And I have the top of that C piece up against the main piece, and you just play with it till it looks symmetrical and you like the way it looks, and then just glue it together with your hot glue. One tip I have for you is to use a little scraper. I have one from Pampered Chef that I got with some stoneware that I bought. I have several of them, and so I took one and I use this to clean off excess hot glue. This kind of helps prevent my fingers from getting burned, and it takes the extra hot glue off really easily. If you don't have a little scraper like this, I'm sure you can find something else around the house to use. I just had a lot of these, so I just used one of those, but probably even a little piece of cardboard or something would work. Next, we're going to close in the sides of the hearts by using those two C pieces that we cut, and I just lined them up on the heart. I put it so that the bottom curl is right up next to that curl of the pieces that we just put on, and then the top curl kind of goes over the top of the one that is on the main piece, and you just kind of have to play with it and line it up till it looks good to your eye and how you like it. It's not going to line up perfectly, but it really doesn't matter once you get it all painted and put together. The main thing is to just have the edges kind of follow a nice smooth line to make it have that heart shape. So this is what it looks like once it's all glued together, and then I'm just going to take my chalk paint and just brush the paint all over this piece. And I found that a bristle brush worked better than a foam brush. I felt like I could get into the little cracks and crevices a little bit better with the bristle brush, because I could kind of just push it in there really well without the paint blobbing everywhere. So I'm just going to paint the whole thing. Once that's dry, then I'll turn it over and kind of fill in the edges on the back side. You don't have to paint the back side completely, but it will help the edges be painted if you turn it over and paint it from the back side. I did find that about halfway through I needed to turn it over and clean up any drips on the front so that you don't get any blobs of paint, because those will show. So just turn it over a couple of times when you're doing the back side and clean up those drops. Once I was done painting the back, I did turn it over and I gave the front a second coat of paint. Once the paint was completely dry, I took a piece of sandpaper and I just sanded off a little bit of the white paint in various places so that the black shows through. This gives it an aged look and that farmhouse look, and just makes it look weathered and old, and I just really like that effect. And so I just did that all over the heart. You can do that as little or as much as you like. If you accidentally sand off too much in a place and you don't like it, then you can just paint over that, let it dry, and sand it a little bit again. When you're all finished, if you like, you could spray this with a clear sealer. I would recommend using a matte finish so that it keeps that old look and doesn't look shiny. Then I'm just going to add a hanger to the back of this, and I'm just going to take a little piece of the scrap that I had left from the garden fence, and I'm just taking it from one of the little arched pieces and fitting it to that little center part, and I'm just going to hot glue that in the middle there, and then that will make a place for a nail to catch so that I can hang this on the wall. So here it is all finished and hanging on the wall. I love how it turned out, and it only cost $2 to buy those 2 fence pieces from Dollar Tree. The paint I already had on hand, as well as the hot glue and the other supplies to make it. So for $2, I could not be happier.
And for the next project, I took 4 of these hearts and I combined them together to make this gorgeous, oversized wall medallion. So let me show you how I did that.
So in addition to the 4 hearts, you're going to need an extra fence piece, and we're going to cut 4 pieces out of that 1 fence piece, and these are going to be the pieces that go in between the hearts to complete the medallion. These pieces basically consist of the top arch piece and then the arrow part, and the only part we really don't need are those swirls at the bottom. So I'm going to cut those off, and then I'm going to separate each arched piece, and we're going to leave that arrow piece attached in the middle. So this is the shape that you need, and we need 4 of those, and you can get all 4 of those out of 1 fence piece. Then I'm just taking my ivory colored chalk paint and painting these just like I did the hearts. So the exact same technique that I did on the hearts, and I paint a couple of coats of paint on these and make sure I get all on the sides and everywhere. Once they're painted and they're completely dry, then I'm going to take the sandpaper just like I did on the hearts and just run over them just kind of randomly. And I start out light at first and just knock off a little bit of that paint to give it a worn look, and then you can always go back and take off a little bit more if you want. If you accidentally take off too much, then you can just add a little bit more paint in. But I'm going to do this on all 4 pieces as well. Once you have the 4 hearts and the 4 pieces that are going to go in between the hearts, then it's time to assemble this. And this is probably the hardest part, just getting it lined up. And so I'm taking 2 of the hearts and putting them with the points together, and then I'll take the other 2 hearts and I'm going to put them on the sides. So it's kind of like a 4-leaf clover. And I'm actually setting the ones on the sides on top of the ones that are on the top and bottom. So they're overlapping some, and I'll show this up close here so you can see a little bit better. So if you're looking straight down at it, this is what you want it to look like. Once you have them lined up, then you just take your hot glue gun, and I'm using the Gorilla Glue sticks. I think that they hold better, and so anywhere that they are overlapping and touching, I am putting the glue in there to hold it together. So now that I have the 4 hearts attached to each other, I'm going to take one of those filler pieces that we cut to fill in between the hearts, and I'm just going to line it up so that it fits in between, and then use the hot glue again to attach it. Then I'm going to continue that with the other 3 pieces. Now I did have a little bit of trouble with the spacing. My hearts didn't quite have the same spacing, but I felt like it was more important to get that center lined up because of those arrows and all pointing to the center. I feel like that's where your eye is drawn to. So I really made sure that the center of my heart was lined up, and then these pieces that are filling in between the hearts, I just tried to space them the best that I could, and they weren't perfect, but you really don't notice it. Once I have it all glued together, I'm going to very carefully flip it over, and it's a little flimsy because it's so big. It's like 28 inches in diameter. So I'm going to flip it over carefully, and then on the back side, I'm going to add quite a bit of hot glue anywhere where the pieces meet and where they need securing more, and this will make it a lot stronger. I'm also going to take my wire cutters and snip off the ends of those in-between pieces that are sticking out a little bit, just because I don't want them to show from the front side. And so it's just really easy to snip those off where they're sticking out. So here is my finished medallion, and I think it turned out amazing. I love how it looks, and I'm actually, I think, going to put it up above my fireplace, and I think it's going to look great there. I have to do a little patching on the wall first, but I think it turned out great. And so let me know in the comments what you think of it. But I'm really excited because overall this cost me $7 to make. I needed 7 of those garden fences, and I already had the paint. So for $7 and a little bit of work, I am really pleased with this.
Next, let's make this fun photo display on an easel stand. I found these wood easels in the Crafter's Square section at Dollar Tree, and I was really excited to use these in some DIYs. So I'm going to be using this, and I'm also going to be using one of these unfinished wood trays, also from Dollar Tree. To start off, I'm going to remove the label from the back of the tray. A really easy hack for this is to use a hairdryer or a heat gun. And then I'm going to just go over this lightly with some sandpaper just to get rid of any little splinters. Then I'm going to give this a coat of paint using some black chalk paint. This is Waverly chalk paint from Walmart in the color ink. It's basically just black. And of course, you can paint this any color you want to customize it to go with the decor or the look that you are wanting. And I am painting the entire piece, inside the little squares, the tops of the edges, and also around the sides and the back. If you are returning to my channel, thank you so much. And if you are new, welcome. And if you like Dollar Tree DIYs and DIYs on a budget, then be sure to hit that subscribe button. I chose 4 different photos that I wanted to print off, and I just printed these on cardstock on my printer, and then I'm going to use my paper trimmer to cut them apart. And then I measured the inside of the little boxes in my wooden tray, and I'm going to just trim the photos to fit inside those boxes. So now I'm going to use some matte finish Mod Podge, and I am going to just put these inside the little boxes. So I am putting a good amount of Mod Podge on the bottom of each square, and then I will put my photo on. Now I know some people put Mod Podge over the top right away. I feel like that makes it wrinkle more, and so I will put the Mod Podge down, put my photo down, and then let that dry for just a little bit before I actually go over the top with another coat of Mod Podge. And once I've gone over the top of all 4 pictures, I'm going to set that aside to dry. And I wasn't quite sure how I wanted to embellish this, so like any good crafter, I
dug out my box of miscellaneous embellishments and just started digging through. There are all kinds of things in here. So I decided on this ribbon from Dollar Tree, and I am just going to wrap this around the outside of the little tray. And I'll use a little hot glue to secure it along the way. So I thought about painting the easel black as well, but I actually like the contrast. And then I found this little button brad, I guess you'd call it, just in my scrapbooking stuff. I'm going to put a little piece of the ribbon through that button, and I'm going to put that on the top of the easel. I also added a little charm, but the battery died on my camera, so I didn't get that on film, but I just hung it with some little twine from the button, and you'll see that here in a minute. Then I used some hot glue and attached this to the top of the easel. Now when you glue something on the top, you want to make sure you leave that center back leg of the easel free so it can open and close. And that's all I'm going to do to this one. Of course, you can embellish yours as little or as much as you like. This next project is a kitchen decor piece that will double as a recipe holder. For my next project, I'm going to be using this cutting board sign that was in Dollar Tree for Easter, and I'm going to be removing the little tacks that are in the corners of the sign just because I don't want to get paint on them. I am going to save them because I will be putting them back on the sign. Next, I'm going to use some chalk paint. This is Rust-Oleum chalk paint in the color of linen white, and I'm going to paint over that design that's in the center. I do recommend going over this with a very light coat of paint at first because the design is just paper. If you get it too wet, it will kind of start to wrinkle or bubble. So just do a light coat at first and let that dry completely before you do a second or third coat. And I think I did have to do about 4, maybe even 5 coats to cover some of the design on this. Next, I am using just a teeny bit of Waverly Antique Wax and this little dry chippy brush from Dollar Tree, and I am dry brushing a little bit of this brown paint over the top just to get rid of kind of that stark white and have it blend in a little bit more. And then I'm also going to add some of this same paint or the antique wax to the back part of the sign to darken it up a little bit. And if you are new to crafting, dry brushing just means putting a very little bit of paint on a dry brush and lightly brushing it over your project so that just a little bit of paint stays on your project. So I want to add a design to the center of my sign here, and there are lots of options such as this wall decal from Dollar Tree. You can use part of that. They also have lots of other styles for any kind of decor that you would like to use. I'm going to go more with a farmhouse style on this, so I am using these rub-on transfers that I picked up in the Crafter Square section at Dollar Tree. So this is going to be a decor piece that is also multifunctional. So I'm making this as like a recipe holder, but it could also hold just a picture. So I had this little clothespin in my stash. It was gray and I wanted it to be brown, so I'm just giving it a coat of brown paint, and then I am going to hot glue this to the top of my sign.
Next, I'm going to cut out the rub-on transfers that I want to use and position them on my piece. Before I ever start attaching any of them, I'm going to lay out all of them until I'm happy with the design. Once I'm happy with the layout, I'm going to go ahead and remove the backing from the rub-on transfers and go ahead and transfer them onto the project. And I like to use a little scraper tool for this. You could use like a credit card. And depending on what surface you're putting these on, often they stick really easily without having to press much. I found I did have to press more on this project. And if any of the edges are sticking up, you can just press those down really carefully with your finger. Now, just so you don't think that everything always goes perfect for me, I wanted to show you this. I did have trouble with the transfer on this one word. It did not want to stick, and I had to just pull it up with part of the letters missing, and then I decided to go over the top of it with a thin Sharpie marker to fill it in. It's not perfect, but it will do. And sometimes those things happen and you just have to improvise. So I think maybe my paint wasn't completely dry and that might have caused it. But anyway, this is what I got. I do want to protect these rub-on transfers, so I am going to use some of the matte finish Mod Podge and very carefully go over the top of those transfers to seal them onto the sign. After the Mod Podge has had a chance to dry, I'm going to take some of this black and white checked ribbon from Dollar Tree and some greenery and add this to the top of my sign. I just created a little bow and secured it with a little pipe cleaner, and then I hot glued that to the top, and then I am tucking in a few sprigs of greenery just to tie it all in and finish it off. Then for the last step, I'm going to add those little tacks back in the corners of the white part of the sign. And I did add a little bit of hot glue just to help secure them, because since I had popped them out, they were a little bit looser than they were before. And the last step is to add a little hot glue at the bottom of the easel to attach the sign. I'm only attaching it at the bottom because I don't want to put hot glue at the top to keep the easel from opening. I love how this turned out. I think it's a beautiful decor piece just the way it is, but it's also functional. It will hold a recipe card or even a photo. And if you like to pull up recipes on the internet, you can also set your phone or tablet on this while you're cooking or baking. What a great gift to give to someone who likes to cook or bake, or as a housewarming gift or wedding present. I am really happy with how this turned out. Here's a picture from the Wayfair website where I got my inspiration for this next project. These tiles are bigger than what I'm going to be making, but still $147 for a set of 4 seems pretty pricey. And you certainly could make larger ones than I'm going to do today using these 12-inch self-adhesive wall tiles from Dollar Tree. I am just going to use 2 of these today, and I'm also going to use 2 of these fall wall decor pieces that I had on hand. Dollar Tree carries these pretty much year-round, just in different styles. And you'll see in a minute that these are the perfect size to use for this. So I'm going to take out my wall tile, and it's just a real flimsy piece of plastic. It has a peel off part on the back for your adhesive, And then I am going to take my little box, and you can see this is the perfect size. It fits that center square just perfectly. So I'm going to prep my box. It has a little raffia bow on it, and then the words have an actual like kind of raised glitter uh, effect to them. So I'm going to remove that bow, and then I'm going to use some sandpaper and just sand this until it is smooth. For my first piece, I am going to cut out the center square of this tile, and it will fit on my little box perfectly. These tiles cut very easily with just a regular pair of scissors because, like I said, they are just kind of a flimsy plastic material. I was kind of surprised to find out that the adhesive on these tiles is only around the very outside edge, so there's no adhesive in this center part. I'm not sure how good that is if you're going to put these on an actual wall, but I can work with this even though it doesn't have any adhesive in this center part. I can just put some glue on the back and glue it to my little box. I'm going to use my hot glue gun on the low setting so I don't melt the plastic tile, but you could use just some other type of adhesive such as this Weld Bond or E6000. For my other tile, I am going to cut out the corner so that I have a different pattern because I want these two to be different. So I'm just going to cut out the corner of this tile, which means you could make 4 tiles out of this one self-adhesive sheet, which is really cool. Since I didn't have an exact line that I was cutting on for this square, I am using a ruler and a thin Sharpie marker just to draw a nice straight reference line so that I know right where to cut. Once I have my tile pieces cut out, I'm going to add some hot glue to them and just glue them to the top of those little wood boxes. I would recommend going light with the hot glue just to prevent the chance of possibly melting the plastic material these tiles are made of. Now I'm going to paint my pieces using some chalk paint by Waverly in the color Truffle. This is a dark brown. And I am going to paint this with a nice good coat to make sure that all of that silver color is covered. And I will paint the sides of the box as well. So now that those are painted brown, I am going to let them dry thoroughly, and then I'm going to come in with some ivory colored chalk paint. This is actually a color called Chiffon Cream. It's by Rust-Oleum. I picked this up at Walmart, and it's just more of an off-white instead of a white. I'm going to get a little bit of paint on a paintbrush and wipe off any excess, and then I'm going to lightly run my brush over the top of this tile. I'm going to go in the same direction, so you can see I'm just going back and forth in the same direction, and I'm going to let the raised areas of the tile pick up this ivory colored paint. This is really going to bring out the design on the tile, and honestly, it's like really fun to see it kind of come to life. When you're doing this, you want to do it with a dry brush, and you want to use just a little bit of paint because you can always add more, but if you get too much, then you're probably going to have to start over and paint brown over the top and then let that dry and start over again. So start light, and if you want to add more, then you can add more. Once I'm finished with that and the white paint is completely dry, I'm going to come in with some metallic gold paint. This is a champagne gold, which is not quite as yellowy as just a regular gold, and I wanted it to be a little more subtle, and so I chose this. If you wanted a darker metallic, you could use just a gold, or you could use even like a bronze color would be pretty. And I am just using a paintbrush, and I am lightly going over the raised areas. And this is basically like what I did with the white paint, but I'm just being a lot more specific on where I'm putting the paint.
I chose to leave the sides of my boxes just the solid brown. I felt like that made the top of the tiles just stand out more. You could do that differently if you like, but now that mine's all finished, I'm going to give it a coat of matte clear sealer just so that that paint stays onto the plastic tile material. Next, I'm going to show you how to make this high-end mirror and these fun straw lanterns.
For this project, I will be using a mirror from Dollar Tree as well as a pizza pan. I'll also be using some wood beads and a straw hat. This is one that I had on hand already. I picked it up at Family Dollar, but you can also get them in several different colors at Dollar Tree. And I will also be using some spray paint in an off-white color. I'm going to start by removing the back of the mirror so that this will just separate the mirror from the frame so that I can paint the frame. I will also be painting the pizza pan, so I'm going to remove the label off of that, and I'm going to be using actually the back of the pizza pan, so that's what I'm going to paint. I did several light coats of paint, and I actually only painted the one side, the back side of the pizza pan. And once I had those painted and they were dry, I decided that I could leave the pizza pan just the way it was. I ended up having to use a satin finish paint because my other chalk paint actually quit working. And I didn't really want the satin finish on the mirror frame. So I decided to take a little bit of chalk paint and just paint right over the top of the frame. And actually, that's one trick that I like to use when I am painting something that has a smooth surface, such as the pizza pan or even this frame, is to spray paint it first because spray paint seems to adhere better, and then to go ahead and paint over the top of it with a chalk paint or something like that. And that gives me the finish that I want, but it's a little more durable. So I'm going to be adding some of my straw hat to the pizza pan. So I'm going to remove that ribbon that was around the hat, and then I am going to cut off the brim of the hat. Once I have the brim cut off, then I'm going to lay it on the back side of that pizza pan, and I'm going to decide how much of this brim I need to use. And so basically I just want it to be the size of the pizza pan and enough or wide enough so that when I put the mirror in the center, I don't see any of the white pizza pan. Then I'm going to just adhere this to the pizza pan using my hot glue gun. And I would definitely recommend wearing a finger protector when you are gluing this down because there are a lot of holes in the straw hat where the hot glue seeps through and it's pretty easy to burn yourself. I did make a cut in the circle of the brim of the hat so that it was easier to finish it off, and then where it didn't fit quite on the pan just because of the way the brim laid, I trimmed that off, and then I just glued down my seam and tried to make it as seamless as possible. And you don't need to worry if the outer edge of the brim of the hat is not perfect along the outer edge of the pizza pan because we are going to cover that up with the wood beads. So I've gone ahead and strung some wood beads on a string so that they are the perfect length to go around the brim of the hat or the outside edge of the pizza pan. And I don't want the string to show, so I am going to just cut off the string and hot glue it inside the beads that are on the end to hold it together. This way there won't be any knots showing in between the beads, but I can still leave them on the string, which makes it so much easier to attach it to the project. Then I'm going to attach my string of beads around the outside edge of the pizza pan using some hot glue. And I'm not gluing down every bead, I'm just adding some hot glue every few inches or so. And now I'm going to take my mirror and add it back into my frame, and then I'm going to attach it to the center of my pizza pan using some hot glue. And then I need to add a hanger to the back, and I found this one in my stash. I cannot remember what these are called, but I know I probably got it in a package at Walmart. And I'm going to add some E6000 and attach that to the top of my back side of my mirror, and then I'm going to let that dry overnight. I think this makes a beautiful wall decor piece, but I also have another way that I'm going to show you how to use it, so make sure you keep watching. All right, on to the next DIY, and I'm going to be using this hat from Dollar Tree as well as some of the scraps from the hat that I used for that mirror. Also, I'm going to be using a couple of different styles of little lanterns that I've gotten at Dollar Tree. These I just had in my stash, but I know that you can find different styles at different times at Dollar Tree. And I'll be using some jute twine. I'm going to start with this little lantern. I don't want to leave it white, so I am going to be painting it using this Rust-Oleum Forged Hammered Burnished Amber spray paint. Say that fast 3 times. And I'm going to paint the base and the top, but I don't want to paint those little cross bars in the center because I think they'll show through my straw hat more if I do. So I'm going to leave them white, so I'm just putting some painter's tape over them to protect them from the spray paint, and then I'm going to spray this and just a couple of light coats to go over it, and then you'll notice that this spray paint has like a texture to it, and that's why it's called the Forged Hammered spray paint. It has kind of a hammered metal look, and I really like that. While my paint is drying, I am going to take my hat and I'll remove the ribbon around the hat, and then I'm just going to find the little end and snip the thread that's holding it together, and then it just pulls apart. And this is great for crafting because you can pull this apart and have a whole bunch of like straw ribbon to use for DIYs. And through the magic of video, my spray paint is dry. I'm going to remove the painter's tape, and then I am going to start adding my straw ribbon. And so I'm just tacking it down with a little hot glue, and then I'm going to just wrap it around my lantern. Now I did have to kind of angle it a little bit to wrap as I worked my way down. And so if you want your lines to be straight across, then you might want to just work in strips. So like add one round and then cut it off and then move down and add another one. But as you can see, I just wrapped it, and even though it was angled a little bit, I kind of liked that look. It didn't bother me at all. So it's just whatever you prefer. And then when I got to the end, I just added a little hot glue to secure that down and then trimmed off the excess. And there's a little hole on the top where there used to be a hanger that I had removed when I used this for another project. So I am just adding a little bit of jute twine and just making a simple little hanger just to finish it off, just a little extra detail. And then I added a different little LED tea light to it that was brighter than the one that came in it, and I think it looks great. For my other little lantern, I'm going to be using some of that darker colored straw hat that I used in my mirror project. And then I'm going to wrap it around my other little lantern the same way that I did the first one. I also added a little piece around the top of this lantern as well. I removed this silver little hanger from the top of this lantern, so I wanted to add a little bit more of an embellishment on the top. So I took some jute twine and I am making a tassel. I did this by wrapping the twine around my fingers about 8 times or so, and then I'm tying another piece of jute twine to the top of my circle, holding it all together, and that's going to be the string that I am going to add some beads to. And then I'm tying another piece of twine just a little ways down, kind of to make a little neck of my tassel, and then I'm trimming off the bottom to kind of even it up. Then I'm going to take some wood beads and add them to my longer piece of twine above the tassel. And then once I decide how long I want that to be, I'm going to tie a knot in the same place over and over again so that I get like a big knot. And that's what I'm going to use to glue to the top of my lantern. And I just love how the light looks shining through the holes of the straw hats. I just think this looks so cool. And as promised, I want to show you another way to use that mirror. It can be used as a tray, and I think it looks amazing paired with these little lanterns. I love the way the light looks reflecting in the mirror, and I think this makes just a gorgeous centerpiece.
This centerpiece riser is one of my favorites. Let me show you how to make it. I'm going to be using these 2 wood rounds that I picked up from Family Dollar. You should also be able to get them in the Dollar Tree Plus section. These are from summer, and I actually got them on clearance for 50% off, so I paid $3 for both of them. I'm also going to be using some wood beads. I'll also be using some of these wood knobs. These are some that I picked up at Hobby Lobby, and they are 1.5 inches in diameter. They're flat on one side, and I actually have 4 of them that I am going to repurpose from another project that are already painted in the exact way I'm going to be making my riser. So this is perfect. The paint I will be using is Rust-Oleum's chalk paint in the color Chiffon Cream. And I'm going to be using some Waverly Antique Wax just to distress this or do some dry brushing on it. And to assemble my project, I will be using the wood glue by Super Glue that I picked up at Dollar Tree and a little bit of hot glue. I'm going to start by removing the twine hanger and the staples that are holding it on. And I did have to use some needle nose pliers to pop these out, but I like that they're just stapled on and I don't have holes to fill. I did start to remove the words from this sign, and then I realized that I really don't need to remove all of it. I just need to remove the parts that are out toward the very edges so that I have space to put my wood beads on. Then I'm going to measure my wood beads all the way around so that I know how many I need to paint. And then once I have that figured out, I'm going to add them to a gallon Ziploc bag. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of my chalk paint to the bag, and then I'll close it up and just squish those beads all around in that paint to coat them. This is what I have found to be the fastest way to paint a lot of these little wooden pieces. Then I'm going to carefully pour them out onto a paper towel, and then I will take another paper towel and just gently kind of blot over the top just to remove any excess paint from them. And once that first coat of paint has dried, then I'm going to add just a little bit more paint into my bag, and I'm going to put the beads back in there and give them a second coat, just basically repeating that process that I just did. After taking them out of the bag the second time, I did use my heat tool to dry them just a little bit and help separate them so they didn't stick together and dry that way permanently. And then I set them aside to finish drying completely. Then I'm going to paint both of the flat sides of my wood rounds using the same chiffon cream chalk paint. And I wanted a good coverage of paint on this, so I did end up putting, I think, 3 coats of paint on this, letting the paint dry in between each coat. And here's a little tip for you. If you want to know if the paint is actually dry or not, if you put your hand on it and touch it, and it is still cold, even though it's not tacky, it's still not dry yet. So let it dry until it feels room temperature. And don't forget to paint those edges. And on the other side, I did paint in just about a quarter of an inch all the way around because that's the only part you're really going to see. I didn't worry about painting the rest of that side. Then I'm going to take my antique wax, and you could just use a brown paint for this, but I have this wax and I think it works really well. And so I am going to put this on a dry brush, and I am going to just brush a little bit on each of the beads. I did do these individually. It really didn't take that long, but I found this was the best way to get the look that I was wanting. Then I'm also going to dry brush on my wood rounds on the side that I painted. And I always start really light with my dry brushing, and then I kind of work up to the amount that I want. And so you're just going to lightly brush over this with just a very little amount of paint on your brush. It works best if your brush is dry. That's why it's called dry brushing. And like I said, you can just keep building and adding until you get the look that you want. And here you can see the difference of how it just gives it a little more texture and gives it that worn antique look. Now that I've added the dry brushing to both of my pieces, I'm going to decide which one I want to be the top of my riser, and then I'm going to use the other one and add the feet of my riser to it. I'm adding the feet to the finished painted side of this because if you pick up your riser and turn it over, this will be what you see, and you want it to look nice. So I'm using some of that wood glue and also a little bit of hot glue just to attach these, and I just kind of evenly spaced them so that they would be a good support for my riser. Now I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to start gluing my small wooden beads all around the outside edge. For this, I am only using the wood glue. I didn't try to add a little bit of hot glue to it. There just wasn't enough surface area to make that work and have it not become kind of messy. So I am using the wood glue and putting just a little bit on the end that has the hole on the bead because that has a little bit of a flat surface and it's going to sit nicely and not try to roll away while I'm gluing these on. And obviously those holes are not going to show on the finished project because they're going to be sandwiched between the two big wood rounds. Now when I got to the end, there was a space that the beads didn't fit in exactly. So those last 3 or 4 beads, I just spaced a little bit evenly so that it still looked like it was filled, but it did have a little bit of gaps between a few of the beads, but when the finished project is done, you don't even notice that. And then I took a few extra beads and just placed them around kind of in the center so that this would add a little bit of additional support for the second wood round that is going to go on top. So now I'll take my wood glue and just put a little bit on each of the tops of those wood beads all around the outside edge as well as the beads in the center. And now I'll just place that second wood round with the painted finished side facing up down on top of all of those beads that I just put the glue on. I'm going to make sure it's all lined up nice and neat, and then I'm going to put some heavy books on it and let it sit until that glue is completely set. And here is the finished riser styled on my dining room table. I think it coordinates beautifully with my table and I am so happy with how this looks.
I have been wanting a galvanized tiered tray, and I found this one online for $50, and I knew I could totally make this for a lot less. I will be using one of these planter trolleys from Dollar Tree, and this has some little wheels on the bottom of it so that it rolls around. And for the top tray, I am going to be using this pie pan from Dollar Tree. I will also be using a 12-inch long piece of wooden dowel. This is a 7/8" dowel, and I got it at Walmart. It was longer. This is just a piece I had left over, but you could also use even the handle of one of the plungers from Dollar Tree. And then I'm going to be using one of these chopping mats out of this 2-pack from Dollar Tree. I'm going to be using just one of these shower rings out of this pack from Dollar Tree. And I will be using one wooden bead, and this is just something I had in my stash, and I'd say it's about 1 inch in diameter. To paint my trays, I'm going to be using some of this aluminum metallic spray paint that I picked up at Walmart. And I'll be using some elephant colored chalk paint by Waverly and just some lighter gray craft paint, and it's not shown here, but I'm also going to be using some black craft paint. And for glue, I'll be using E6000 as well as my hot glue gun. I'm going to cut a circle out of one of the chopping mats to fit in the bottom of this planter trolley, and it just so happens that that pie pan is the exact size of the inside of that planter trolley, so I'm using that as a template. I'm just going to trace around it with a Sharpie marker and cut that out with scissors. And the reason I'm doing this is because that planter trolley has those indented places in it, and things won't sit level in that tray if I don't put something over the top of those. Next, I'm going to take my dowel and I'm going to measure up 8 inches and make a mark because I want to cut an 8-inch piece and have a 4-inch piece left. Then using my miter box and my saw, I'm going to cut that dowel at the place where I marked it, and I will put a link in the description box to this miter box set. It is so handy for doing small crafts like this, and I use it a lot. Then I'm going to take some sandpaper and smooth out any rough edges and make sure there's no little splinters. Now I'm going to assemble what will be the top of my post for this, or my handle, so to speak. And this shower curtain ring fits right into the holes in this wooden bead, except the one end sticks out at an angle a little bit. So I'm just taking a drill and drill bit and just very carefully making the hole a little bit bigger, just so the end of that shower curtain ring will lay a little flatter up against the bead. And it's not perfect, but it works a little bit better this way. Then I'm going to take that and put a little bit of hot glue inside the hole on that bead and insert my ring. And you want to work a little bit quickly here so that you get the bead positioned correctly with how the ring sits inside that hole. Then I'm going to take a little bit of E6000 and put on top of the 4-inch dowel and set the bead on top of that, and then I will take my hot glue gun and run some hot glue really carefully and neatly all the way around the base of that bead to help it stay in place while that E6000 is drying. Next, I'm going to take that planter trolley and I'm covering up those wheels with some painter's tape, just so that when I spray paint it, the paint doesn't cause the wheels to get stuck. Then I'm going to take my metallic aluminum spray paint and I'm going to spray the entire bottom and all this around the sides of that planter trolley. Next, I'm going to insert that piece that I cut out from the chopping mat, and I'm marking right where the center is because I want to know where that center post is going to be so that I can cut that out, and actually I'll be gluing my post to the tray itself, or to the center of the trolley. But I'm using some E6000 and some hot glue to glue in that bottom insert, and then I will spray paint the entire inside. And you can see here that I'm holding that post in the center because I want to still be able to see where I marked when I go to cut it out. And then I just make sure it has a good coat of spray paint. Once my spray paint has dried, I am going to use the elephant chalk paint and also the lighter colored gray craft paint, and I'm going to use kind of a fluffy old paintbrush that I have, and I'm going to just pounce these colors all over the two trays, and I'm going to start with the darker color, then I'll go over the top with some of the lighter color, and then back and forth a couple of times, alternating, just kind of filling in and giving it really kind of a mottled look, kind of like galvanized metal is. So you can see here that I'm getting a little bit of the paint off of the brush before I actually put it onto the trays. I want it to be kind of a really random pattern, so I am twisting and turning my brush as I pounce it on there and just giving it a really random look. And don't worry, because at first it doesn't look like it's going to look like galvanized metal at all. It just looks really kind of messy. But once you start layering the different colors, then it really starts building up that galvanized metal look and gives it some more dimension. So after I put on the layer of dark, then I'm going to take the light color paint and do the exact same thing over the whole project. A couple of things to note here. I didn't worry about doing the very bottom of that bottom tray, and also on that center place in the middle of the inside of the tray where we marked where the post is going to go. I didn't paint over that because I still needed to see that mark where I need to cut out that hole. On the pie pan, I am measuring to find the center of the inside of the pan. I'm going to mark that because I don't want to paint right in the center so that my post will adhere better when I glue it to the center of this pie pan. Then I'm going to use the same painting technique that I used on the planter trolley that will be the bottom tray, and I'm going to paint both the inside and the outside of this pie pan. Next, I'm going to use some Waverly chalk paint in the color ink. You can use any black craft paint for this, and I'm going to paint my dowels and the little ring on the top of the other dowel. And I didn't get it all in the video, but I'm just painting all of it black except for the ends where I'm going to be gluing it. Now I'm going to take an X-Acto knife and very carefully cut out that circle where I traced around the dowel on that plastic cutting mat. Now remember, this is a chopping mat, and so it is a little bit hard to cut through, which is a good thing if you're using it for a chopping mat. But I had to go around this probably 5 or 6 times, pushing quite a bit with a lot of pressure to cut out this circle, but just want to do this slowly and carefully so you don't cut yourself. I did also spray my pieces with this clear matte sealer, and when I sprayed the dowels, I did not spray the ends so that they were free of that when I glued them to the trays. Which is the next and final step. So I'm going to put a little bit of E6000 in the center, and then I'm adding some hot glue so that that will cause the dowel to stand up and hold it while the E6000 dries for a stronger bond. And you do have to hold these for a little bit. And then I'll also be doing the same thing on the top tray. I will put that shorter dowel with the little ring on that in the center of that pie pan, and also with E6000 and a little bit of hot glue. And then I'm going to place some E6000 and again some more hot glue on the top of the dowel that is in the planter trolley, and place my pie pan on this. And when you do this, you want to make sure it's centered and kind of look at it from the side to make sure those dowels are lined up so that it looks like it's going all the way through.
And to give this a little more stability, you could drill a hole up through the bottom tray into the dowel and use a screw up from the bottom, and that would give it a little bit more stability. But overall, I'm really happy with this tiered tray. And next are these beautiful signs made from Dollar Tree palette signs and coasters.
For this project, I will be using these 2 palette signs from Dollar Tree. I'll also be using these 2 coasters that I found in the kitchen section, some spring florals, and also this gray and white cotton twine. Going to remove the label off of the back. I love how easy these come off because usually they do not come off very easily without using some heat or something. So then I'm going to take a piece of sandpaper and just go over each of the palette signs to kind of clean them up and smooth them out. Next, I'm going to paint my signs using this gray color. This is just acrylic craft paint, and I know you're probably thinking gray is not a very spring-like color, but hang with me because this is gonna work out just fine. So I'm just giving the palette a couple of coats of the gray paint, and I'm painting front and back and everywhere in between. So now I am using some Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory, and I am dry brushing on the front of my palette sign just to tone it down and give it a little bit more of that farmhouse worn look. Next, I'm going to take the coaster and the gray and white cotton twine, and I am going to wrap the cotton twine around the edge, all the way around the coaster, just using some hot glue to secure that as I go all the way around. And I went around this 3 times just to cover the edge of the coaster and kind of give it a little bit of a framed look. And I did this on both of the coasters. Next, I'm going to glue my coaster to the center of the palette sign. I'm going to use some E6000 on this because the coaster is fairly heavy, and then I'll also use some of the hot glue. I like to use Gorilla Glue sticks in my hot glue gun just because they're a little bit stronger of a hold, and so that's what I'm using. And the combination of the E6000 and those Gorilla Glue sticks are really going to hold this in place. I was originally going to add some of those pink florals to this, but I actually liked it better without, so I just left them off. And see, what did I tell you? Doesn't this look so beautiful? And it's still perfect for spring, even though I used that gray color.
Thank you so much for staying and watching this video. I know it was a very long one, and I know that in some places the video or audio wasn't great because some of those were old DIYs from when I first started my channel, and I figured you probably hadn't seen some of those, and they were great projects, so I just wanted to share them with you. So thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please hit that like button. It really helps my channel and helps other people to see this video as well. And if you haven't subscribed and you'd like to see more Dollar Tree DIYs and budget DIYs, then hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the bell and set your notifications so YouTube will notify you every time I upload a new video. Thanks again for watching. I hope you all have a blessed day.